All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Women's Cities Club program, Social Shifts in Greater Cincinnati. I am Ann Buning, the Vice President of Programs for WCC. Tonight's forum will be a preview of the sixth edition of the report, Social Areas of Cincinnati, an analysis of social needs, which focuses on demographic changes in the area since 1970. And it's also based on data from the United States Census. I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank the program committee members who worked very hard to make this event possible. We have Beth Sullenberger, who is also our board president, Janet Buning, Jeff Dye, Lori Frank, Sarah Giddens, Amy Katzman, Susan Noonan, who is also going to be tonight's moderator, and also Sherry Ricow. Our program tonight is a panel discussion with Michael Maloney from the Urban Appalachian Community Coalition, Christopher Auffrey from the School of Planning at University of Cincinnati, and Peter Petronio from the Children's Hospital's Innovations for Program Evaluation. Additionally, we are glad to welcome Cincinnati Vice Mayor Jan-Michele Kearney and Hamilton County Commissioner Denise Driehaus, who are joining us as respondents after the report. During the presentation, we ask that you please keep your audio muted and avoid background noise. And we also encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat throughout the program. There will be a brief Q&A session once all our panelists are finished speaking. And the program is scheduled to run about, I believe, 50 minutes, and then we'll have the question and answer session at the end. So please join me in welcoming our moderator, Susan Noonan.
So I would like to introduce the panelists. So I was trying to get my view back. I will eventually. So tonight we have very well-informed people. Michael Maloney, whom I've known for a long time, is a community organizer, social researcher, consultant, and activist. He holds advanced degrees in education and planning. As a community organizer, he's worked in Walnut Hills, Over the Rhine, East End, Lower Price Hill. He's also helped establish programs in the North Side, South Fairmont, Camp Washington. So a lot of the neighborhoods that need it. Mike was the founding director of the Urban Appalachian Council in Cincinnati, and he headed the Appalachian Area Office of Catholic Social Services of Southwestern Ohio. He's taught Appalachian studies, planning, and philosophy courses at several area colleges, and he currently operates a consulting service, Michael Maloney and Associates. And they recently have reinstituted the Urban Appalachian Community Coalition. So his Social Areas of Cincinnati, there have been 5 editions, provide documentation of how Cincinnati and the metropolis, I love that word, have changed demographically from 1970 through 2005, 2009. He's currently working on the 6th edition along with our other co-authors here. And his other publications include Appalachia, Social Context, Past and Present. So second, we have Christopher Auffrey, who is PhD professor of planning in the School of Planning, College of Design, Art, Architecture, and Planning, easier called DAP, at the University of Cincinnati. He teaches courses in healthy urban planning, planning theory and ethics, planning history, and planning finance and budgeting. He also serves on the board of trustees of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association. His current research focuses on understanding how demographic change impacts urban neighborhoods and how good planning practices can address health disparities and create healthier neighborhoods. Heaven knows we need that in some of our neighborhoods. Professor Auffrey has co-authored with Mike Maloney the 4th and 5th editions, and currently completing work with Mike, Jeff Dye, and Peter Petronio on the 6th edition. He is also a co-author of The Case for Cities, a book that you should all read, by the way. Peter Petronio is senior data management specialist with an expertise in quantitative analysis in geographic information system, GIS analysis. I actually had never heard of that before. I probably shouldn't say things like that. It makes me look stupid, but it's true. So he has worked over 10 years as an evaluator with innovations in community research and program evaluation at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. His commitment to data integrity and social equity have been utilized in his role to draw actionable insights from data for community and early childhood education programs in Cincinnati. Peter holds a master's degree in experimental psychology from Morehead State and a graduate certificate in data analytics from UC. So we have three incredibly informed people who are going to give us a preview of the 6th edition, which isn't even out yet. And so that's kind of exciting. And at the end, we're lucky enough to have our vice mayor and actually the president of the county commission here to respond to some of the changes that our authors will speak about. So I'm going to let them decide who goes first, second, and third. I'm sure they've decided that. And so we will get started right away. So we have plenty of time, but I did want to mention that the Q&A will be at the very end after the respondents, Jan, Michelle, and Denise have a chance to speak. So thank you, everybody.
Our objectives, what we want to cover is to discuss the social areas of Cincinnati as a tool for using census data and spatial analysis to inform community change, which is one thing this crowd is all about. And then we'll do the team will do the comparison of how our city and the metropolis have changed for the last 50 years with these once every 10 years studies. And then we'll have the Q&A, and I don't know how whether the presenter, the responders are going before the Q&A or after. I hope they know.
I think they're going to be before.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, just a little creativity here, Cincinnati skyline, and some quotes, including a quote from Plato, our famous view from the cut in the hill. The change is slow until it isn't, by Roger Spitz. Any city, however small, is in fact divided into two. I think we've divided our city and the region into 4, what we call social areas. And that's a quote from Plato, believe it or not, from 376 BC. People tend to overestimate how much change are in the next 3 years, but underestimate how much will change over the next 10 years. I think that is meant as kind of a theme for this presentation. Any city, however small, is in fact divided into 2. And I think we've covered those. And next slide, please. The first edition of the Social Areas of Cincinnati was written in 1974. Did that one by myself with a team with the Cincinnati Human Relations Commission, where I worked at the time. And Chris Auffrey joined me as co-author with the 4th and 5th editions, and Dr. Eric Rodemaker also helped with the 5th edition. This study documents the social and economic changes in Cincinnati since 1970, data used to improve decision-making for community leaders and advocacy groups. It's now being updated to include the 5-year average American Community Survey data for the years 2017 to 2021. Next slide. So we actually use two methods in this study. First is the census tract map method. We take about 20 variables, including poverty and several other social indicators, including poverty, race, gender, and others. And there are maps for each of those demographic groupings. And we use time series analysis because we're doing it over time. I've mentioned somewhere that I'm not aware of any other city that has a study that's covered this much time. If you all find out that there is one, please let me know. Time series analysis, change over time. And then the second major methodology is called social areas analysis. It's a recognized tool for needs assessment in the field of social work. So even though we have people from various disciplines presenting the study and actually doing the study this time, it comes out of social work. Next slide. Socioeconomic status is really another way of saying social class. And the usual variables for determining social class is income, occupation, and education. We have added family structure and crowding. At least back in 1970, crowding was fairly important. It's not so important. But you can still tell a difference between the social areas and the amount of crowding. The definitions are included here. Median household income for family income, percent of the population 25 years or older with less than a high school diploma, education, occupation. Definition is percent of workers in unskilled and semi-skilled occupations, and percent children under 18 living in married couple households is the family structure indicator. We think it's important because the more members you have in the family, theoretically, the more incomes you have and the more prosperous the family is. So we're not arguing that a two-parent family is necessarily more moral, harder working, or anything like that, but we think it is still a socioeconomic factor. Crowding is the percent of housing units with more than one person per room. And so how we arrive at a social area is roughly a quarter of the census tracts in the city. We use census tracts because it's large enough to be more reliable than a block group, which is the smaller of the census groupings. Next slide, please. And I think I've covered this in part. I've listed what the variables are that are included in determining socioeconomic status of the census tracts, and actually of the quartiles. And we rank each of the 119 census tracts in the city of Cincinnati, and then use the rankings to determine the four quartiles. We could have said quintiles, but the idea is to This goes back to the social areas of Los Angeles in 1940, when, as far as I know, the first of these publications was done. And then a group at the University of North Carolina, where I was a student, picked up and we did a study of the city of Charlotte, North Carolina. And that's the model that this study was based on. Next slide.
Okay.
All
Thank you,
right,
Mike.
this is where Peter takes over.
Yeah. So I'm going to be talking about what the SES quartiles are. They're a classification for socioeconomic risk based on the SES index score, which is what the rank that Mike was talking about is derived from. And the quartiles can help researchers understand relative socioeconomic risk within Cincinnati. It also allows them to estimate the economic conditions of populations using SES quartiles as a proxy when we don't have income or social class variables. So it's important to emphasize that they don't represent the SES of individuals, but rather the average characteristics of the population living within their census tract. But that being said, by breaking the tracts into quartiles, we have a powerful but very simple tool to help us understand the differences in populations in similar areas of the city. Next slide, please. So this table here shows the average values for each of the 5 indicators. They're separated by SES quartile. And this is showing the 2021 data from the latest analysis, and it gives you a better idea of the differences between the quartiles. The relationship between the quartiles and indicators are pretty apparent. You can see how from SES 1 to 4, income and the percent of married couple household both increase with SES quartile. And we also see that the percent of adults with less than a high school diploma decreases, as does the crowding and the percent of workers in unskilled or semi-skilled occupations. So most notable are the differences between SES 1 and 4. So for instance, SES 4 tracts have a median household income that is 3.5 times greater than SES 1. And you can see how SES 1 indicates considerably more risk across all 5 indicators, whereas SES 4 indicates much less so. So this table gives you an idea how we can reliably differentiate and group data based on 5 indicators while only using SES quartiles. Next slide. So this social areas analysis can be applied in a number of ways. As we've shown so far, we can use small area data like census tract to draw conclusions and make decisions, but we can also use aggregate data and aggregate into larger units like neighborhoods or the previously mentioned SES quartiles. So furthermore, this example specifically looks at the city of Cincinnati, but this method can also be applied to broader geographical regions such as counties or larger metropolitan areas. So and now that we understand how SES index and quartiles are made and what they mean, we want to share some examples of how you can use the information to better understand the social areas of Cincinnati. And so what you're looking at here is a preview of a dynamic map we've made that shows the census tracts of Cincinnati, and they're color-coded by quartile. So SES 1 is dark red, 2 is light red, 3 is light blue, and 4 is dark blue. This map is open to the public, and its link is provided at the end of the presentation. Next slide. And what this map allows you to do is to zoom in on areas just as you would with something like Google Maps, but it also allows you to click on individual tracks to see what quartile they fall in and to see the statistics for the 5 indicators. So right now we're looking at a close-up of census tracts around Westwood. you can see that tract 101 is selected. And when you click on a tract in this map, it shows a pop-up with the indicators shown in the pop-up window. And let's see. Oh, actually, yeah. We see that tract 101 is SES 3. We also see its median income, percentage of adults, less than high school education, and the other 5 indicators that we've introduced earlier. Next slide, please. And then when you click on a different track, the information changes to reflect your selection. So track 109, for instance, is an SES1 area. And you'll sometimes find that tracks may differ on only 2 or 3 indicators and still be ranked higher or lower. But what's important is the larger context that the indicators provide when we consider all 5 of them together, which is the purpose of the SES index. So I encourage you after the presentation to take a look at the map. Again, the link will be provided at the end of the presentation. But at this point, I'm going to hand our presentation over to Dr. Christopher Auffrey.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to share some of our work with you. Certainly any comments, suggestions you want to send me or anybody, any of the 5 of us, 4 of us, we're very open to listening to your suggestions here. I want to just briefly go through some of the history that Michael has done over the last 50 years to give a little bit of a context in terms of what it's saying about Cincinnati. So this is a 1970 map that was produced through Michael's work, and it serves as a baseline for the comparisons that we have for the decades since then. You'll note the SES 1 and 2 areas, the darker red and the lighter red, are in the core older neighborhoods of the city. And I assume probably everybody on here tonight is pretty familiar with the shape of Cincinnati, a little bit different than you find in most cities, somewhat unique, but also in terms of the neighborhood structure and where we find the different neighborhoods. And we're very much a city of neighborhoods. And so we have as I indicated, the SES 1 and 2 areas in the core older neighborhoods and along the Ohio River with a few exceptions. The SES 3 and 4 tend to be on the periphery with a few exceptions. Next, please. And subsequent to Michael's work in 1970, we had the 1970s, the following decade, where we saw a number of changes taking place. 1970s were what are considered the end of the great migration of Black African Americans from the South to northern cities seeking opportunity, getting away from Jim Crow, as well as what's been called by some the Great Appalachian Migration that came from the northern South, the Appalachian Mountain region, and ended up in cities like Cincinnati, as well as parts of Detroit, Chicago, and a number of other Midwestern cities. Also in the 1970s, we saw the east side of Cincinnati trying to recover from what had been a massive influx of displaced poor from parts of the basin area in Cincinnati. And as such, we saw our basin area essentially over the Rhine, Pendleton, parts of downtown, and maybe the West End. Population loss, about 30,000 people from 1940 to 1980. At this point, over the Rhine became a mostly Black enclave, displacing many of the Appalachians that had lived in that area prior to that, who had replaced many of the Germans. Cincinnati population loss that had begun in the 1950s. We reached our peak population in Cincinnati in 1950 at about 504,000 people. And by 1980, we were at about 385,000 people. Also, this was a time of school desegregation with some white flight, reflecting that, reflected by that perhaps, as well as improved opportunity for many. And then also, this is a period of ongoing highway construction that was causing displacement and disruption in many neighborhoods. Next neighborhood, next slide, please. And so ultimately, in 1980, we see some changes that resulted from those issues that arose in 1970s. Again, most of the SES 1 and 2 areas are found in the core older neighborhoods of the city and along the Ohio River, with a few exceptions. And the SES 3 and 4 areas are mostly on the periphery of the city, with a few exceptions. So not radical change, but some marginal change from 1970. Next slide, please. The 1980s decade brought improved policies, but ongoing challenges to Cincinnati. Perhaps the policies, a lot of the urban renewal programs that had been instituted in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s had ended. But there were now the challenges associated with suburban expansion. And though at a somewhat slower pace than it occurred in the 1960s and the 1970s. It's interesting to see that Cincinnati, as a percent of the metropolitan statistical area, a percent of the metropolitan area, had been 8% in 1970, with 5.7% in 1980, and 4.8% in 1990, and 3.3% in 2000. At the same time, we saw poverty rates in Cincinnati change from 1970 from 15% of the population considered poor by federal standards to 18% in 1980 and 24%, 24% in 1990. Next slide, please. Looking at the 1990 map, we see this ongoing change. Shows significant changes from 1980. Most of the SES 1 and 2 areas are found in the core of the city as before, but increasingly we're seeing a U shape extending up from the basin, surrounding what we see as Cuff and Clifton, if you look at the middle of the map. And further to the east and to the west, we see growth in the SES 1 and 2. Also, as before, the SES 3 and 4 areas are mostly on the periphery of the city, with the exceptions of a core pillar extended north, Cuff, Clifton, Spring Grove Village, College Hill, and then to the west as well, Bond Hill, Rose Lawn, and Hartwell. Next slide, please. So the subsequent decade, 1990s, we saw declining enrollment in CPS, Cincinnati Public Schools. Cincinnati population declined from its peak further. We get a total of 170,000 fewer residents in Cincinnati in the year 2000 compared with 1950. Also, at this point, we see a neighborhood, Mount Adams, which had been going through a whole process of gentrification since about 1950. It had pretty much been completed, and East End gentrification was going on, expanding as well. Also, there was further expansion to the west side in terms of poverty, as what had been a very middle class and largely SES 3 and 4 neighborhoods on the west side of Cincinnati were increasingly seeing rates of poverty increasing. Next slide, please. So in the year 2000, we see a continued pattern of change. Again, most of the SES 1 and 2 areas are found in the core of the city, but now encircling Cuff and Clifton. It's also extending further to the north and northwest neighborhoods. The SCS 3 and 4 areas are primarily on the periphery with a few notable exceptions. Next slide, please. So during that subsequent decade, the 2000s, again, we're seeing poverty move to the west side at an increasing pace. And we're seeing that the SES 4 now covers most of the east side from Mount Washington and even over toward over the Rhine. New investments taking place, new development in areas on the east side. And we're seeing new investment and development in places like Avondale and Evanston, where much of that hadn't taken place previously. Next slide, please. The result is what we have in our 2009 map is, again, more of the red, the dark red, SES 1, SES 2, the Mill Creek area on the west side, extending out now through Riverside, Sedamsville, and Riverside, and into parts of West Price Hill, Westwood, and up into Mount Airy. And of course, over towards Spring Grove Village, Winton Hills, Carthage, and even parts of Roselawn and Bond Hill, which at one point had been SES 4, SES 3 neighborhoods. On the far east side, increasingly SES 3 and SES 4. Next slide, please. This subsequent generation, subsequent decade in the 2010s, we see this continued expansion of poverty on the west side. We see increased investment on much of the eastern side of the city, from OTR to Mount Washington, and places like from California to Kennedy Heights. We see increased investment and development in a number of neighborhoods, especially in the Northeast neighborhoods, and rising poverty in West and North neighborhoods. Next slide. And so our final map, where we are today using our American Community Survey census data, is a very different picture from what we saw in 1970. We see on the west side of the city, large areas of SES 1, and that curving around to the north, places like Hartwell that were once SES 3, and Roselawn and Bond Hill that had been SES 4 are now SES 1 and SES 2. And then on the east side, we see neighborhoods that had once been SES 1s are now SES 4. Next slide, please.
All right.
Okay.
This slide looks at the long range trends over the half-century period. And these are things that to a large degree happen to a lot of American cities, but especially the part that we live in, the industrial Midwest. The loss of living wage jobs was enormous. This region that we live in, Midwest, the industrial Midwest, lost 2 million manufacturing jobs during the period, say 1950 into the 70s. And probably at least 2 other jobs for every manufacturing job, or maybe as many as 3 or 4. Anyhow, it was millions of jobs that we lost. And new jobs occurred, of course, but many of them were in the service sector where the wages were not as good, benefits were certainly as good. So the cities really felt this loss of living wage jobs. and Cincinnati was among them. The single biggest trend within the city was the loss of over 64,000 manufacturing jobs in the Mill Creek Valley and in other industrial centers such as over the Rhine, Reading Road, and Montgomery Road corridors and the East End. A result of the changes, increase in land price and home prices, both in suburbia and in central city, have caused stress, movement of population, and homelessness. The two-parent family has all but disappeared in SES1, and Cincinnati has one of America's highest child poverty rates at 32% at one recent count. Educational inequality has declined. That's very good news. But we think, and this was a conclusion of a United Way poverty committee about 20 years ago. They just decided from their research, and they hired outside consultants, that the reason that inequality keeps increasing is there are not enough well-paid jobs with benefits, and therefore the creation of such jobs would be a primary policy issue to work on. And another movement that has happened during this time is the return to city life movement that includes a lot of retirees and young professionals. It does a lot of good things for the city, improves the tax base, the energy base, but it also creates competition for housing between the poor and the newcomers that are returning. In many cases, they are the grandchildren of the German immigrants, of the Appalachians and others who used to live more in the city. Let's see. In 1970, this is the racial trend. We think of Cincinnati as being much blacker, and it is in terms of percentage. But note that in 1970, we had a Black population of 125,000. And in 2020, the 2020 census, they had a Black population of 125,000, but not changed substantially, except in percentage. Cincinnati has gone from a city of 453,000 to one of 309,000 in a 50-year period. Hamilton County has gone from a population of 924,000 to 831,000. And the 7-county metro area has grown from a population of 1.2 million to one of 2.2 million. It's grown by 1 million people. In 1970, Cincinnati's West Side neighborhoods were largely white, Roman Catholic, and composed of stable families. In 2021, the area has several neighborhoods that are struggling with low levels of education, high unemployment, family breakout, and high crime rates. The same kind of changes that were taking place in neighborhoods like Walnut Hills and Avondale in the 50s and 60s. Next slide, please. The changing shape of the city. The high poverty areas are now mostly on the west side and in the Mill Creek Valley. From the data we have, it is possible to project that by 2040, SES4 will encompass almost all the census tracts between Madisonville and Mill Creek, most of the east and some of central Cincinnati. Avondale, Walnut Hills, except for Tract 19, parts of Evanston, Bond Hill, and Mount Auburn remain in or near SES 1. A huge enclave with a good bit of poverty. But some areas within those neighborhoods receiving major investment and becoming more diverse economically, which may be another word for being gentrified in some cases. Next slide. All right. And this is the area that Chris helped us cover. But here's a chance to see the 1970 map and the 2021 map side by side getting, and you can see the blue area has expanded all the way through Mount Adams and down to over the Rhine. It's expanding even into the West End to some degree, and definitely into the downtown area. And you can see the U that Chris described here. So, next slide. And Chris is going to present the case study section.
Okay, and I'll begin here too. Just, we look at a lot of maps and numbers, but ultimately the work about understanding change is in the places where Cincinnati lives, where we want to use several neighborhoods as case studies to add a more personal human element to the changes taking place. While there was too little time here to discuss the causes of the change revealed in these case studies, the study of the patterns could reveal interesting, we hope will reveal interesting issues that will inform our understanding of the changes and the ability to react to those changes. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm having a little technical issue here. Okay. Originally, Avondale was annexed into Cincinnati in 1896. The neighborhood had become a majority Jewish neighborhood in the early 1900s, and then a majority Black neighborhood in the 1950s as a result of urban renewal projects that displaced residents in Cincinnati's West End. The neighborhood has an impressive stock of buildings and has experienced periods of substantial disinvestment. It's located adjacent to the expanding Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center and University of Cincinnati Medical Center, as well as close to I-71. And so it's in an interesting position in terms of how this evolution of a neighborhood has taken place. We can see the changes where in 1970, 1980, 1990, that it was predominantly SES 1, SES 2 neighborhoods, SES 2 in 70 and 80, whereas 2 of the 5 tracks in 1990 were SES 1 and 3 were SES 2. So from the perspective of the SES social areas analysis, there hasn't been a lot of change here, and you wonder why, given the proximity to the level of development that has taken place nearby. Next slide, please. We move further there, and we see, in 2000, 2009, 2021, again, a pattern of disinvestment in terms of the darker reds are becoming more prominent. So we're going from SES 2 neighborhoods to almost all but 1 track of the 4 tracks in 2021 are now SES 1 compared to SES 2. Now, this is a relative comparison, and so it's not an absolute measure showing that if someone moves, if some place moves from SES 1 to SES 2, but it's a relative change to what's happening in the rest of the city. So I guess the argument could be made that parts of Avondale aren't keeping up with what's going on in the rest of the city. And the question, of course, is why. Next slide, please. We'll move from there to another interesting case study, which is Clifton Heights, or CUF, Clifton Heights, University Heights, and Fairview. Of course, it's where much of the campus of the University of Cincinnati is located. And as some of you are probably well aware, over the past 20 years, enrollment at UC has increased by 64%. We've gone from 34,000 students to over 53,000 students in a period of 20 years. And while not all the students are residents of CUF, certainly there's an impact on the neighborhood, both in terms of demand for housing and a variety of other services. And it's interesting to look at this place in terms of what might be expected from the future. So again, just quickly looking at the change from 1970, 1980, 1990, where we see an interesting change from red to blue as the neighborhoods become somewhat higher SES. Next slide, please. From 2000, 2009, 2021, again, change. We seem to, as far as SES, social areas of Cincinnati analysis is considered in the year 2000, where we have 3 of the 5 census tracts are blue, where it changes back to 3 of the 5 for 2009, and then 3 of the 6 as the area grows for 2021. Okay. Next slide, please. Another very interesting case is in Oakley. I know when I first came to Cincinnati, Oakley was sort of a working class neighborhood, which was much more affordable. It's a neighborhood on the east side. It's incorporated as a village, 1882, annexed into Cincinnati in 1913. A long history as a home of workers of Cincinnati Millicron, an internationally known machine tool company that unfortunately departed Oakley in the year 2002. In recent decades, with a walkable design, thriving neighborhood business district, what was once considered to be sort of a less attractive blue-collar working-class town has now seen rapidly rising property values and growing affluence. So interesting case. And what we see is that reflected in the color of our maps, where in 1970 you had a SES2 and SES3 census tracts, and continues into 1980, where one of those SES2s turns into SES1, 1990, where we now have 2 SES1s and 1 SES2. Next slide, please. And then in 2000, again, you see the patterns until currently, where all 4 of the census tracts are in SES4. And again, not surprising to probably anybody who knows much about Cincinnati, but in terms of understanding what were the particular characteristics, the particular circumstances, and why Oakley evolved in a particular way compared to, say, CUF or Avondale. Okay, next slide, please.
All right,
Mike?
we're shifting now to a look at the 16-county Cincinnati, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana metropolitan statistical area, which illustrates the point, among other things, that you don't have to stick with just the city limits of Cincinnati, you can do a region however you define it and use the same methodology to produce the quartiles, which we are fond of because they've met our needs, and people trying to understand what we're trying to do can also understand readily. All three of us are going to comment on this map. I will start by pointing out there's at the top of Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County, if you can follow the line of the river on the north end of those three counties, that crooked line that divides Kenton and Campbell is the Licking River. And that's where the older, denser area that includes a lot of SES 1 and 2 begins. And if you follow that right through the Mill Creek and through the Avondale Reading Road corridors and other, you might say, poverty alleys within Cincinnati and Hamilton County, you can follow that line right on up into Butler County through the Hamilton, Middletown metropolis areas on up into the area of Franklin, which is northeast of Middletown. So that's about a if you were pessimistic on that day, you call it a 20-mile long ghetto, right in the heart of the metropolis. And you see other areas of SES1. They are beginning to disappear in the rural counties. And especially in the three northern Kentucky counties, you see an awful lot of blue. And in Warren County, you see almost all blue. Now that's the area that we would refer to as having urban sprawl. You know, you're more likely to find a $300,000 or $800,000 house than you would see a $200,000 house in some of those areas. So the 20-mile ghetto is surrounded by a sea of rising wealth. And you can see that if you compare the shape of the metropolitan area from census decade to census decade. So that's part of what I wanted to point out about the shape of the metropolis. The remaining low status areas in the rural areas on all sides tends to be on the outer edges of those counties, the SES1 and 2 areas. So you can wonder what this map will look like 20 years from now. Will all of the rural area be blue? That would be an awfully rapid development, but the development that we've seen in Warren County, for example, in northern Kentucky, has been hard to believe for the last 20 to 30 years. So Peter and Chris, please add your comments.
Okay, let me just add something there as well. I think it's important to recognize that these categories, these SES categories measured, are not a reflection of the value, worth, capabilities, or goodness of the people who live in the different parts of Cincinnati or the region. The SES categories are a reflection of the history, opportunities, challenges, the good or bad fortune, the different individuals and groups have experienced. And as such, by our work here, by including an assessment of these place-based change, and I think that's very important because it becomes very relative. You look at some neighborhoods that have changed radically with going to lower status or changed the other way, really through little influence internally. It's the surrounding communities and the macroeconomic forces at play that are influencing the future of those places. And so our challenge is how we understand this information and how a different neighborhood with similar SES characteristic change can be different than, and it allows for assessing the influence importance of those things that are those characteristics of close by places. So I'll leave that there. Peter?
Yeah, and I was going to add that much like, if you can go back to the map really quick, sorry. Much like the SES quartiles for the city of Cincinnati, we've also made an interactive map for the 16 county analysis available to the public, and a link will be provided to that as well. And the format is the same as the one I explained earlier, where you click on tracks and see their data in the quartile. And you can also see in the map how we span the index to a broader context. The relative differences change as well. So what may be SES3 within the context of the city of Cincinnati could be an SES2 within the context of the metro area. So it's important to keep that context of the area being analyzed in mind when you're interpreting the quartiles. And we can go to the next slide. And this is just a table that shows the average values for each of the 5 indicators by quartile, like in the earlier table, but this is for the metro area. In terms of relationships between quartiles, they are the same as those of the cities. But when you compare them, you notice a difference in the magnitude of the indicators. So here, SES4 is a median income of over 115,000, whereas in Cincinnati, it was about 89,000. And Mike and Chris, if you have anything else you wanted to add on this, feel free.
No, I think we want to go to wrapping up so we can have a few questions, I think.
Okay.
So our way of wrapping up for a moment here is that we are shaping greater Cincinnati, we the people, the residents, the parents and grandparents, the planners, the innovators, the advocates, the entrepreneurs, the change makers. The responsibility for shaping this colossus is up to us. The federal government and the state government seems less interested in playing any role in helping us with that. So I feel like the cities have too much responsibility, and that's why we all work so hard in trying to bring about change.
So I'm going to stop sharing here so that we can then open this up to our respondents, and Susan can work with them.
Yeah. So Denise and Jan-Michele, do either of you have any desire to go first to respond to some of the findings that they found?
I'm happy to. So, you know, yeah, let me just say this is a tremendous, I think, gift to us to have this kind of data. I cannot wait to start looking at these interactive maps, start plugging in and looking neighborhood to neighborhood. I think this is really, this is a great tool, and I'm really excited about it. So as I'm going through this, let me just say, as this presentation is going on, I'm getting phone calls from East Westwood because somebody just got shot, and there's all kind of chaos going on. And this is kind of, my life these days. I get calls all the time. I often go to murder scenes. And I told them, I said, I'll be ready in about half an hour. If you need me, I'm coming over there. But, but this is what's going on. And so I look at, what is going on in our city, and there is this, as this widening wealth gap, like $40,000 difference between like the median income for Black families was 30 something, and for white families like 70 something, and it's getting worse. And I'm looking back. So what is going on? And some of the data that was just presented, like, family structure, and you were saying in the SES1 areas, like Avondale, for example, they're mainly single family households. Well, we know that there are more Black people in prison now than there were slaves in the 1800s. I mean, Black families are really being torn apart by mass incarceration. Black people get worse sentences. They spend longer time in prisons. When they get out, it's really hard to get housing. It's hard to get jobs. I'm working with, one young man, and we're trying to keep him from being back on the street. And his issue is when he got out of prison, he had all these fines, like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of fines. So he can't get his driver's license. And so, I was trying to get him a job with the city. And I thought that would, really help him change his life, because instead of being out on the streets, he's going to have a good job with the city, but he can't get that job without a driver's license. And now we're back trying to see, what the judges can do to, help with the expungement. I don't know if his crime is even if his history is even expungible. We're going to see, how do we waive these fees? I mean, there are all kinds of, one problem gets on top of another. And, and that's where we end up. And then just looking at the neighborhoods, we talked about Avondale, we talked about Oakley, and then you talked about Clifton and Cuff. And I'm just thinking like Avondale versus Oakley. Avondale, the Jewish and white population moved out, and the Black population moved in. So race is, I think, is a huge part of this, because you have people who didn't experience generational wealth from home ownership. The 1930s, they started redlining areas where Black people lived. And so, they couldn't buy homes, they couldn't get homes, they couldn't pass that wealth on to their families. That in the 1940s, when the vets were coming home, they started doing, we need housing for our veterans, which we did. Let's get low interest loans, let's get these homes built, but not for Black veterans, only for white veterans. Black veterans, they said, we're going to find you, we're going to build you some rental units. And so again, while, white veterans had the opportunity to move up into the middle class, Black veterans did not. And so so when you look at the neighborhoods, I think the racial part of it is just a huge factor,
Yep.
which you've mentioned. So I'll leave it at that for now, but, it's really, the data and seeing how, and let me just say this about OTR, which, an area that, we all enjoy the restaurants and all of that, but it always concerns me how people did get displaced and, ended up, a lot of folks ended up losing their, they just couldn't stay because of the costs, and moved to the West Side. And so, and you were showing that movement of people, OTR in 2010 was about 70%, this is OTR South, was about 70% Black. And, by 2014, 4 years later, it was like 70% white. I mean, the Black people just moved out, and so it's, we're seeing this happen a lot. And our challenge on council is, how do we do development? Because we need development. We need our cities to grow. Everybody wants thriving, beautiful neighborhoods with thriving business districts. But how do we do that without displacing the residents, so everybody gets to enjoy the benefits, the assets in their neighborhood? So I'll leave it at that for now. But just lots of thoughts on this. I think this data is really going to help us a lot, and looking neighborhood by neighborhood. This is fantastic. So I should have started by saying thank you, because I think this is wonderful, wonderful information.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan-Michele. I know that Ohio Justice Policy Center is working hard to help returning citizens. They advocate for legislation and they, provide free legal service to try to help people expunge and so forth. But we need more agencies that are working to help returning offenders, because that is a huge problem in the Black community. Denise. No, I'm sorry.
Susan, I'm sorry, Denise, and Denise, happy birthday, by the way. But
Oh,
Susan,
thanks.
say real fast that JPC and my office and the Office of Reentry are starting to do ongoing expungement clinics. I mean, it's been a great partnership, and so I think that's going to be real helpful. But they all do great work. Okay, sorry, Denise. Okay.
No worries. I also want to say thank you. I can't wait to jump on the interactive maps either, and kind of dig in a little bit. But the information is striking. It's just really striking to see how these changes have happened over the decades. And while this presentation was city-centric, the city is in the county, so it matters. It matters to those of us that are at the county level, trying to figure out how to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate in the wealth of the county and the wealth of the city. And I was most struck, and Jan-Michele, you said it as well, that it seems as though we're becoming very segregated by way of socioeconomics when you look at that map and the changes. And it would be interesting from my vantage point to put a demographic shift overlay that with the socioeconomics and see if what Jan-Michele was mentioning plays out, and I suspect it would, where we have Black families in this community that continue to struggle, and as they move around these socioeconomic, that also moves around. And so I think, to me, it's an indicator that we have a lot of work to do in certain parts of the city and in certain populations of the city. And so at the county level, we are always looking at how to make smart investments. And Jan-Michele, I know that you and I both have been recently visited by people that are looking at what they're calling the wealth gap and trying to pilot programs in certain areas of the city, those being Riverside and Avondale, predominantly Black neighborhood, predominantly white neighborhood, to see what strategies work so that we can use that as a template to do work in other parts of the city with strategies that, move the needle in some of these areas for people that are in the lower socioeconomic rung of the population in Cincinnati. So more to come on that front, but also, it was discussed, what is driving some of this, education, family structure, opportunity for jobs. And so very specifically, and you mentioned reentry, we at the county have an Office of Reentry. It's been up and running for 8 years. And we are trying desperately to connect people that are coming back to our community from jail with the supports they need to be successful. That's reentry. It's also plays out in the space of addiction. And so we are also working very hard to make sure that people that have gone through treatment and are moving into recovery, hopefully long-term recovery, also have the supports they need to not slide back into using and continue to struggle. And so lots of things happening on those two fronts. And the other piece is this investment in economic development. And so we have partnered with the Port Authority to make sure that the county is investing in bringing jobs to the county. And one of the roles we play is, when you think about government's role in incentivizing the private sector to set up a manufacturing hub or expanding their business in the county, we are investing in properties that we can collect to offer job-ready sites to companies that want to come to Hamilton County. And it is challenging work. The state used to be very invested in this work. That shifted a number of years ago. It's starting to shift back. I think they understood that that lack of investment is really playing out in a negative way. And so we are trying to then invest ourselves where the kind of the state left off. It's a slog because it's a very expensive proposition, but we're doing it. And the Port Authority is trying to, again, strategically invest in certain neighborhoods to provide job opportunities to folks that live there. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot going on, but I too want to thank you for the information. And I can't imagine how many man and women hours went in to putting this presentation together and those interactive maps. But it's really, really interesting. So thank you for presenting it.
Okay, so we have a question, and I guess there's a hand raised. Let me start with a question.
Do you mind
There
if I
seem-
jump? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
No.
did you want to say something? Go ahead, Jan-Michele.
I just saw Alice Schneider had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to read that.
Oh,
There
okay,
seem-
all right.
There seems to be a positive correlation between family structure to two-parent family and income. Any thoughts or explanation?
Yeah, so I was going to comment on that because, you know, you all know that, you know, women make less than men for the same job, and Black women make less than anybody. So you can imagine when, you know, one of the parents, for example, is sent away to prison forever, then now you've got the income of this one person. So, you know, it's just, I mean, trying to rise out of that kind of poverty is really, you know, ridiculously hard. So yeah, there is a positive correlation. I think people, you know, blame the families a lot, but I mean, it's really systemic. And I think people have to see that if, you know, I mean, the arrest rate and the mass incarceration, I mean, it's a huge problem. You know, the other thing is really education. And this is just a very difficult thing to face, but I was at a presentation and someone, you know, was talking about how you can predict whether someone has, you know, a high risk of going to prison when they're in third grade, because if they're not reading well by third grade, you know, up into third grade, you learn to read. Then after third grade, you know, you read to learn. So if you haven't learned how to read, you're not going to be able to read to learn. And so by ninth grade, you're dropping out of school. That means you're not going to graduate from high school. And then you have a higher risk of being in prison. So I thought that's really horrible that, you know, we're predicting third graders are going to end up in prison. But the data shows that, so there's got to be a way of stopping that cycle, you know, that pipeline, as they say, as well.
Right.
So let me just comment real quickly on the pay equity piece, because pay equity is a huge problem because most of the single parent families are led by women. And women are traditionally underpaid, and it starts from the very beginning, and then it continues on. So both the city and the county have implemented policies to not ask for pay history when someone comes to work in our organizations, as many of you know, and so that is a step in the right direction. But pay inequity, I should say, still exists, and until we get a handle on that, we're going to be challenged to correct some of these problems when it comes to single parent households. So at the county, every year we have 40 different employers sign on to our pay equity pledge, and we do a learning series to make sure that they know what strategies exist to kind of to decrease the inequities. But it can be very destabilizing as a community to have so many single parent households, because when you have two, obviously the income level goes up because it's a collective. So, I mean, I don't think that stat's surprising. It's just a matter of how we start to address it.
I think, you know, your work with pay equity, Denise, is fantastic and so important. You know, another thing, Denise and I, and also President Pro Tem Victoria Parks, went to Columbus and found out about this Building Futures program where labor unions have this 12-week apprenticeship, and they help folks from underserved communities get ready for good union jobs. I mean, you know, learning the trades, being electricians and plumbers, where they really get skilled labor. And that, I think they're on the 4th cohort now, Denise, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so the Urban League here, you know, we asked the Urban League to house that program, and they are, and actually the county has funded it. The city needs to put some money into it too. Victoria and I keep saying, you know, we haven't put any money in it, but we show up all the time cheering everybody on. So I think, things like that, those kinds of opportunities will make a big difference.
Okay, I think Noelle has her hand. Noelle, is your hand up? I don't
Yes,
see.
it is.
Okay, you have a question, not a call, just a question, okay?
Well, yeah, so it's a question, but it's got a little bit of backstory to it because so I super interesting, but so I am in the social work field, right? So I feel like this is definitely geared toward that. And I was literally looking forward to it, by the way, did not disappoint. So I've also participated in the community health needs assessment, the CHIPS, both regional and Cincy. And then I feel like that's tied to this bigger state healthy people thing. Okay, so that's the health department and hospitals so they can keep their accreditation. This has so many similarities. I love that it's 6 years and I love what it looks at. The other one is 3 years. Is there a tie to this, SES process as far as, some sort of departmental, like governmental sort of like regulation requirement? And if so, what department?
I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody?
Okay.
Did you know
I'm
what
actually just, oh, I'm sorry. Oops. I'm so sorry.
No,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Okay, well, I
sorry
guess
I
I'll
wasn't on
Google it
mute.
later
Sorry,
because I
guys.
literally am so excited about this, and I'll tell you why, guys, okay? Because the SES index, guess what it aligns with? The community need index, okay? My friends in these certain neighborhoods are dying. Now it's more than 10 years above other people in this freaking city of Cincinnati, in the city limits. Oh my gosh. And I love my friends, okay? I love the people we help. It's our allies. And because I see this correlation between the SES index, the community needs assessment index or whatever, and especially because the SES index is done every 6 years, and they literally talk about history. History repeats itself. Dude, what if we could figure out where the poor people are going to move? Because I wanted to comment, but I'm trying not to, about the generational poverty factor. Do you know what I mean? Like, so history's going to repeat itself. We have our generational poverty people, which we really need to look at when we're talking about the wealth gap and just the education, 2-parent, 1-parent household. Literally just, oh my gosh. And then so I'm so sorry. I get really passionate. But I would, just be super excited to see if there was a way that whatever department is over this, SES process and the, people that are over, whether it's the regional or the Cincy, community health needs assessment, Cincy CHIP, whatever, work together to try to identify problems before they happen using data. And then we could just go pop up a gosh darn doctor's office or something when we know people are about to move there. Okay, thank you for
Well,
listening.
thank you.
Sorry, I get really
Well,
excited.
thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Thank you, Noelle. That's something I think we'd all love to do if we had a magic wand.
No, we don't need a magic wand. We got data. We have a 6-year data of like the movement of groups of people, right? The groups of people that are poor. And then we got the community needs assessment that's done identifying, hey, the people that are living here are not healthy at all. And so I literally see the overlap, okay? Like literally see the overlap between the two. And they're the same neighborhoods, but we could identify it before the move happens, is what I'm saying, using this data.
Well,
Yeah.
Let me just say,
to your point, I think, I understand. I think I'm trying to understand what you're saying. I think I got it the second time. So I think this is just a matter of strategic investment and being intentional about if you are doing something in one neighborhood and you're displacing people, where are they likely to go? And how do you respond to that? And how do you provide the supports for that? And do you want to do that at all? Right? I mean,
There
so
are
we have
processes in
seen this
place. I was
play
for
out
the quality of
over and
life.
over again.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, we've seen this play out, and I think we have not done a good job in some circumstances I can think of to anticipate what would happen if you tear down, two humongous housing complexes in the West End. Where are folks supposed to go? And what happens in the communities where they go? You have to be able to adjust. And so I point taken that it has to be more strategic.
And let me just
Yeah,
add to
thank you.
that.
I agree with you.
Yeah, our
Okay,
goal,
I'm
our
sorry, go ahead, Jim.
city is to not have people displaced. So we have to start, and Noelle, I think you kind of mentioned this, so we have to invest in the neighborhoods that we have ignored and haven't invested in. And so
Well,
when
it was actually more for the researchers that did the presentation. The comment was,
Okay.
it was for them, honestly. Yeah, like how does the SES compare to the CHNA? Have you guys ever thought about talking to each other, or what department does the SES, right? Or what is it linked to, so that we can have the two places talking to each other at a research level to identify the things preventatively that way, not within anything that we do policy wise or like nothing like that. Totally like research stuff, I feel like was what I was trying to convey.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I
You
just
want any
comment,
other
Noel,
question,
I'd like to talk to you, Noel, see how we may be able to set up some of that, whether there's, depending on, how the data overlaps.
Oh my gosh, if you've not looked up the CHNA, look it up. Look at the community need index of the neighborhoods
Uh-huh.
in the city of Cincinnati versus the ones that have a high SES. Dude, you'll love it. I
Okay.
mean, and then they do it every 3 years. So you guys do it every 6 years. And you look
Every
at the
time.
history. We could literally figure it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
One,
maybe Noel can get in touch with you guys and you can have a conversation about that, because I think we should move on to other questions now, if you don't mind. But do
I
you
would like to say that our report shows the neighborhoods that are, you can figure out from our data, the neighborhoods that have been working hard to renew themselves and to get ahead of the curve of the growth of poverty and that sort of thing. College Hill would be an example, but if you look, College Hill absorbed 2,500 new people in one decade. And Bond Hill, I think, has similar issues. And so mentioning kind of following people who get displaced to where they go and providing extra help to them and to the neighborhood that they're joining would be a very good policy or program idea.
And how many years ago did the same thing happen in the same neighborhood? I think would be kind of cool to look at too.
Okay, thank you, Noel. I seriously think you should get in touch with Mike and Chris and Peter. We'll give you their information.
I'll
And you
make
can have
sure.
an-
Thank you
discussion
so
with them.
much.
Yeah, okay. Hey, here's a question from Ann. Is it possible to make any projections of the effects from the pandemic on the demographics, such as the large increase in rent and home prices, or the large percentage of women who had to leave the workforce in order to care for their families?
That's one of our conclusions from the 50 years is that there's a heavy parallel between what's happening to the national economy and looking back on that decade. So maybe not fully this study, but if Peter, who is younger than the rest of us, if he maybe does the 7th edition, he'll be able to see there'll be impacts felt in the next set of data. The 2008 recession, we can see the effects of that on the neighborhoods. And of course, the most vulnerable neighborhoods get hit hardest. That's a known fact in urbanology. Though one of the recent receptions, I could see effects even in Mount Adams because it was affecting educated artists, engineers, and hippies in that neighborhood. But the damage is deeper and more permanent in a low-income neighborhood. Our data shows it, and national research shows it.
Yeah, Michael, I think
Thank
you
you.
raised a good point in terms of looking at the outliers and looking at those neighborhoods that have low SES scores, but have somehow been able to overcome some of these obstacles and to understand those conditions better as to what actually drove the kind of changes that allowed them to overcome the obstacles they faced.
Thank you.
I was gonna say poverty is, it's not just economics, it's like, it's an endless cycle of one problem piled on top of another. Someone, mentioned what happened during the pandemic when, women had to leave the workforce and care for their kids. And so that ends up with eviction, and then, people get sick and you can't pay medical bills. I mean, it's, you lose your job. I mean, it's just one thing on top of another, and it just cycles.
You're right. So Jan Seymour says that the city and county need to ease the restrictions on folks with criminal records for jobs and housing. I know a lot of that is state legislation, and I don't know how much control the city and the county have over that.
Well, we are currently advocating for people who are qualified to get the expungements to get them. We have a situation where we have just we're signing on to it. We've got some judges who are taking a very hard line on this. And we as a county are trying to give people supports, including expungement, so they can get jobs, they can get places to live. And we've got others who disagree with that philosophy and are taking a harder line. So we're actively trying to push up against that to make sure that people in the county have these opportunities. Because if you don't have robust expungement opportunities, people get stuck and they can't get out of the cycle.
Yeah, that's right. And when people get out of prison, they need housing, they need jobs, and those are two things that are denied to them. And so that's really right. Even with the city, I mean, the city has this policy of not hiring for 5 years after someone's, conviction, after they've served their time. And so we're trying to get that changed. And so now we're looking at that to see, is that really necessary? I mean, maybe there might be some jobs, but, let's take a look. As a blanket policy, it's just ridiculous. And so we're trying
It
to.
is. And there are so many jobs that they're not allowed to do, like become a barber. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy
Right.
restrictions.
Right.
Okay, so Jeff has a question. We've seen that investments in transportation systems, highways, bus terminals, etc., have effects on neighborhoods and the opportunities. Whoops, couldn't read that. Neighborhoods and the opportunities available for the residents. So that and many other things are policy decisions that can change neighborhoods over time. So I guess that's more of a statement than a question.
More of a statement, and the only thing I wanted to say about that is, these can be really, these policy decisions can really make a difference in the neighborhoods and how they thrive, and whether something is a one-way thoroughfare or it's a two-way street that people can cross. I mean, we've seen that in so many neighborhoods where they decided to put I-71 or where they decided to put a crosstown, thoroughfare has really affected neighborhoods, and we're paying a big price for that in our transportation policy, and the bus terminal moving from where people could get to it, where people can't get to it, things like that.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
yeah,
we
totally-
want to
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, just
I
Jeff.
totally agree. We don't need to move our bus terminal out of Government Square. I mean, that's not a
Right.
good move. Yeah.
Well,
But even
the other piece of this, though, is the positive side. We passed a levy here not too long ago where we have, we've invested a lot in transportation. And so you are correct to say that there are 4 major routes for bus rapid transit, and hopefully it will start to transform the communities in which those routes are going to run. And so those are strategic. Metro is making those decisions, but this community said yes to more transportation options. And so hopefully that'll have a positive impact.
Yeah.
I hope we do the positive stuff.
Yeah, that's no, you're absolutely right, Denise. I mean, that this is, increasing the routes and having them, later, just for example, in some neighborhoods that are in food deserts, there, I think, Sedamsville and Riverside would be an example. Metro increase the transportation so that people can get to the grocery store 24/7. It's really, I mean, a real positive, and getting people to jobs. I mean, it's wonderful.
Yeah, Metro's really done a lot. Now, of course, if
Yeah.
somebody wants to give the city a few $1 billion, we could do something with the subway.
Ah.
Read that article in the paper,
Else
some of the
about that
ideas
subway.
for
People are like,
tunnels.
people are talking about the subway. We have all these other needs. I'm like, okay, we just asked the
I know.
question.
I
We're
couldn't believe it. Did you
not- we're
see
not
some of
about to
the
put a football
ideas?
of money in it at this point. So
The
Yeah,
ideas were awesome and great to
that was
read. Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, a sauna in the subway. Anyway, so James Carson thought that expungement might need to be explained to people, technical term.
oh,
wants-
expunge, yeah. So you're, so you've got a record, and expungement takes that off of the record so no one can see it. And so and there's certain crimes that can be expunged and some that cannot. So in other words, when an employer or someone who's when you're filling out a housing application, if they look on and see you've had a certain kind of felony, they'll say, well, we don't rent to people who've had felonies. But if it's not on there where they can't see it, then that's a plus. And so that's what we're trying to do, to give people a fresh start.
And sealing your record is sort of similar to expungement, but it's a little bit of a lower level. And I do believe that the background checks that landlords run would, not be able to see it if it was sealed. And I would love to be able to seal or expunge evictions. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're working on that. Another thing with the expungement clinics with Denise mentioned the Office of Reentry. So that's Trina Jackson and the Hamilton County Office of Reentry, and the sheriff's working with us too, of course. But another thing we're trying to do is get those fees waived that I mentioned earlier, so that people can, get out and, get a fresh start.
Well, they can get the fees waived if they do a poverty affidavit and they take $1 with them. I know, at least for the felony ones, and they'll send you up to the 5th floor. You get it notarized, you bring it back down, and then they'll file it without the filing fee. I'm not sure about the misdemeanors at the Justice Center.
Yeah, no, I don't mean the filing fees. I mean those thousands of dollars that people have on their record, have, so that they can't get their driver's license. And that's just a huge impediment to people moving forward.
Yeah, it's been successful utilizing the benefits of like the food stamp card to get the reduced payment plan. So it's like we pay $25 and then $25 a month. But keeping the people on the $25 a month schedule, that's the challenge.
Right. So it's 8:40. So let me ask if anybody else has any other questions.
This is
I
really
just-
great information.
I just want to say happy birthday to Denise. She gave up her night, her birthday, to be with us, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah,
And we
I'm
all,
gonna have to go nightcap, Susan.
Yeah. I'd love to have them with you, Denise. Yeah. And
Next time.
to Jan-Michele, who is always here for the Women's City Club. So, and our
Susan,
three,
may I ask a
I
quick
think
question?
probably,
Are
what?
the interactive maps ready now? So if we click on now, we can.
Oh, I don't know. Let's
They're
ask.
there. I put the links in the chat earlier, and I'll put them in again right now.
Okay,
Great. Thank you.
that's right. You did. I forgot to mention
Thank you.
that. So
This
those
is
interactive
wonderful,
maps are
wonderful
ready.
research.
Well, Michael, Chris, and Peter, you guys were awesome. This is an amazing study. And I still got the last one in my office, the book, and I can refer to that one. It's really cool. So thank you so very much. I don't know if Anne wants to say anything at the end of the program or not. And I don't know if
Yes, I was just going to say thank you to everyone who spoke tonight, and also to those who had comments and questions for this last session. Thank you for sticking it out, even though we're horribly over time.
Yeah.
Please remember to check out our website. This recording will be available through there, and also our YouTube channel, and also check our website for future programs.
Right. And it did say 8:45 in that thing. So that's why I thought we were
We're
okay.
okay.
It's only
Yeah, I think we're
8:42.
okay on time.
Okay. Anyway, thank you again so much. And we will see you all at another program and at our national speaker, who is Kathy O'Neill, who's going to be talking about weapons of math, MATH destruction, about what's happening with big data and the algorithms. And yeah, it's going to be fascinating.
Oh, that's going to be good. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
That's
Good. All right, everybody. Well, thank you again. And we will
Thank you.
great.
see you soon.